Welcome to the Legion Strength and Conditioning Podcast. You can check us out at legionsc.com or follow us on Instagram at legion.sc. So in terms of getting better at the sport of CrossFit, one of the things that matters a whole lot but isn't very exciting to athletes is the idea of reducing variance in scores. So what do we mean by that? A term that might make more sense to people as consistency. But I think that variance is a little bit different than consistency. It's sort of like, what is the range of possible scores that you can get on something? So an intuitive way to think about this might be the idea of just maxing out your back squat once a week, every week for 6 weeks. Right. And so if you do something like that, you might have an idea, let's say for simplicity's sake, that your max back squat, your PR back squat ever is 300 pounds. If you were to max out your back squat every week for 6 weeks, 1 week you might hit 285 and fail 295. 1 week you might hit 290, fail 300. 1 week you might hit 305. 1 week you might actually hit 275 and be like, I am done for today, right? So you're going to have a range of possible scores from something like 275 to 305 pounds that is reasonable for you to hit on a given day. And within the sport of CrossFit, actually really narrowing that band of what your possible performance is on a given test is going to be a really, really key performance indicator for how much better you're getting, right? So if we think about the ability to do strict handstand push-ups under fatigue, if we think about the ability to hit a lift under fatigue, if we think about how you're going to do on a certain type of event after having done 4 other events leading into that on a weekend competition. If we think about how you're going to do on a retest of a workout for the 3rd time in a qualifying scenario, over 4 days, all these different situations put a lot of strain on an athlete, and just having a really, really narrow band of variance in terms of how you're going to perform on something is actually really, really important for demonstrating, your skills and your capacity in the sport. And this is something that isn't terribly exciting to people, right? It's not like, wow, over the last 6 months, I've really improved the floor of how bad things can get if I totally fall apart on something, right? That's not something that people really, really think about or notice. But as people improve in the sport, that's one of the things that they tend to get a lot better at. And that's one of the things that tends to really separate people who are, at a higher level in competition from those who aren't. So, John, what do you think about in terms of athletes who you coach, paying attention to their variance and scores, and then also sort of communicating to them that that's actually important and that they may be getting better even when they don't realize it?
Yeah, it's something I focus on quite a lot. And it's never really put out as variance, but I will often give them workouts where I'll give them kind of a bandwidth for their round times. So let's say it's every 5 minutes for 4 rounds, they're doing a piece of work. I might say no more than 5 seconds drop off across each round. And the first time we do that, they might completely screw it up and have like a 30-second drop off. But it's about understanding, it's partly pacing, understanding what pace to come out at. But then it's partly just trying to, like you say, limit the bandwidth of variance and try and keep them within a target that they know they can repeat. And then coming into workouts in future, they know they have that kind of level of consistency to keep in that same area. And we do the same with lifting as well. Most of my athletes that I coach will have a kind of PR, and they'll have what I would call an everyday max, where any given day they can go into the gym and they're going to be able to hit that number. The closer those two numbers are together, the better it's going to be for performance. So someone who, let's say a guy has a max snatch of 275, but you tell them to go max their snatch in the gym and it might be 215, they're going to struggle in a competition. You have a guy that can snatch 265, but every day in the gym, they could hit 245 if they needed to. That's kind of the real area of variance that we're going to focus on in trying to improve consistency for competition.
Yeah, for sure. I think the idea of really bringing up the floor of how badly something can go is super, super important. So we can also use an example of something like, let's say, handstand push-ups, right? It's a movement that a lot of people struggle with and have this just kind of potential to catastrophically fall apart on a handstand push-up workout, right? I'm someone who is definitely in that boat where I have pretty poor upper body pushing muscle endurance and super long arms, right? So if there's enough handstand push-ups, especially if they're strict, there's the potential that I'm just going to like have a total meltdown and be pretty much unable to complete a workout. And with people who struggle on something like handstand push-ups, or we could use an example like a certain volume of toes to bar, a certain volume of chest to bar pull-ups, etc., that improvement there doesn't necessarily mean getting faster at certain handstand push-up tests, right? Someone might actually have a pretty good capacity to do a large set of unbroken handstand push-ups, or they might have capacity to do reasonably well in something that's a test of, let's just say, 5-minute AMRAP of strict handstand push-ups or 50 strict handstand push-ups for time, right? They might actually do reasonably well in those things and then have, like their floor on something like that isn't actually that bad. But then what was that open workout with, it was step ups and then overhead lunges and then 50 strict handstand push-ups. Is that the case? I think so.
Yeah, it started with lunges. It was,
I
want to say 200 feet of overhead lunges.
Yeah.
And then it was 50 step ups and then strict handstand push-ups.
Yeah, totally. Right. So for someone at a sub elite level, the overhead lunges and the step ups weren't necessarily terrible, but there was a certain amount of fatigue built up going into 50 strict handstand push-ups in a row, especially based upon having to hold a dumbbell overhead and then awkwardly to do step ups, right? So someone might actually be kind of okay in certain scenarios with strict handstand push-ups, but then just be, again, catastrophically falling apart trying to do strict handstand push-ups with some accumulated shoulder fatigue and slightly out of breath, right? So what is the floor for performance on strict handstand push-ups in a scenario like that? And if that floor comes up, that person is potentially a lot better at the sport of CrossFit, even if they didn't improve their 50 strict handstand push-ups for time, or they didn't improve their 5-minute AMRAP of strict handstand push-ups, or they didn't improve their ability to do deficit strict handstand push-ups, right? It's like, how bad can this get, right? Do you get to the point where your shoulders lock up, you fail a rep, and you have to just sit there for 90 seconds before you can actually go again? If you can remove that potential just from the range of possible outcomes for you in a handstand push-up workout, you've actually gotten a lot better. And so again, that's a little bit tricky to communicate, and I think can lead to some frustration because athletes don't feel like they're improving, even though that floor is continuously getting higher.
Yeah, so I think let's talk kind of methodology behind this. Like, how do you program for an athlete to improve their or reduce their variance in different sections?
Yeah, I think that the idea in terms of reducing variance is some of the stuff that we've talked about before, which is exposing people to progressions that make sense for them, right? So that they're doing things that they are capable of doing that aren't way outside of the realm of possibility for them. So if we stick with strict handstand push-ups, right, someone might only be able to get a few reps at a time and just being like, okay, great, you're going to do 21, your JT, whatever that stupid workout is, right? 21, 15, 9, strict handstand push-ups, strict dip, and push-ups, right? And it's like, well, that's going to be a disaster for them, right? If they can only do a handful of reps at once. But if you then say, well, okay, you can do a few, maybe we can set up some sort of EMOM scenario where you can actually be successful and get some reps that are reasonable quality in terms of your movement quality, and you aren't totally falling apart. So figuring out where someone is at and making them able to be successful while simultaneously, and this is the tricky part and the contradiction in, all advice, is exposing them to scenarios that are a little bit messy so that they have to be able to do stuff that isn't just like totally structured and something that they know that they can do. So just kind of constantly bouncing back and forth between things that they're probably going to be somewhat successful in or maybe a little bit of a reach for them, and then just exposing them to messy, chaotic scenarios where they have to figure it out, I think is the sort of like big picture way that I think about reducing variance. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I often do a similar thing, especially with gymnastics, is doing that kind of EMOM type situation, whether it's 30-second intervals or minute or 2-minute, whatever it is, just kind of repeatability on the gymnastics side, and progressing people over time with either okay, this week we're going to do every 5 minutes. You're going to do every minute for 5 minutes. You're going to do 5 handstand push-ups. Next week we're going to try and do 6. Next week 7. Okay, let's reset down to doing 5 reps, but we're going to try and do it for 7 minutes now. We're going to try and do it for 8 minutes. And just kind of building a level of density in the number of reps someone is doing, allowing them to avoid hitting failure, but kind of feeling out where those boundaries are for them and feeling out at what point they're going to fail and how can they avoid that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other thing that's relevant to think about is just how much of a buffer do you have strategically as well, right? If you're doing something that is, a long workout that may require some pacing and thinking about how to fraction your reps, or you're doing something where you're really not sure how hard you should go, do you have a buffer where if you do it wrong, you're able to kind of recover while still in the middle of the workout and keep moving? Because some people are actually really pretty good at that. And then, they're able to mispace something. They're able to go too fast and kind of start to fall apart and then back off and recover and be able to finish the workout, at a reasonable pace. Whereas other people, it's like a cliff. Once they fall off, they've gone too hard, they've done too many reps, they hit, one heavy squat clean that gets a little bit ugly and they have to kind of grind it out. And then they're basically cooked for the rest of the workout. So, I think some of that ability to just, fall apart and get back into it is innate. If you look at I think we've talked about this before on the podcast probably, but some of those videos of Jason Khalipa doing open workouts or CrossFit Games workouts in the 2010-ish era, right? Like this guy is just falling apart and suffering the entire time, but he somehow just sort of keeps moving and gets a really pretty good score. And I think that he is potentially gifted in a way that other people aren't. And I don't think it's just like he can tolerate more pain. I think that whatever the fatigue signals are that shut most people down are just somehow different for him. But if you have more of a buffer relative to your pacing strategy, then executing perfectly, while still important, becomes less important because you can kind of adjust on the fly based upon how things are actually going.
So I think it's important for people to figure out what they need to improve on here. Everyone has different things that if they show up in a workout, they know they're going to struggle with. It can be, for some people, I see it in ring muscle ups, where when they're fresh, they're able to hit big sets and they're pretty consistent. Middle of a workout, sometimes it can just break down and they really struggle with it. So I think it's important for people to really kind of map out what areas they need to work to reduce variance on, whether it's the strength, whether it's the repeatability on gymnastics, whether it's just straight conditioning. Something you mentioned, talking about a mile time. Can someone hit a mile in a sub 7 when they're fresh? Great. Can they go 7:30 no matter how tired they are? Great. Or is it sub 7 when they're fresh and 10 minutes when they've just completed something else? It's going to be different for everyone, but understanding what that issue is going to be helpful to raise the game just across the board.
Yeah, and I think that the idea of understanding what your weaknesses are, right? Almost everyone who competes in CrossFit, seriously or casually, has an understanding of, these are the things that I struggle with. These are the movements that I don't like, right? Maybe it's like, ring muscle ups, not my favorite, or running, or like, man, my double unders aren't so good. Everyone knows what they struggle with, but getting better at those in terms of how the sport is actually tested, again, doesn't necessarily mean your best possible performance is getting better. It means your worst possible performance is getting better, right? Because again, if we think about the way that a lot of competitions are scored, and, some people listening to this are competing regularly and other people aren't, but, you're scored based upon your worst event. You see it every year in the Open where someone does quite well on a lot of stuff and then they don't do particularly well on the one workout with strict handstand push-ups, or the one workout with just a few too many burpees for them relative to the rest of the field, and they're essentially disqualified from moving on to the next stage in either the open or, a qualifying event for a sanctional or something, simply based upon the fact that they accumulated hundreds of points in placings on one bad finish. So, getting faster at a specific test that only isolates the one thing that you're trying to work on doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to not lose hundreds of points on something that, isn't in your wheelhouse. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, no, I think it does. So I think you see it at the games a lot, where you see the people who after day one are sitting, top 10, looking good, and then they have just like one bad event or two moderately bad events. And really it almost always stems to one movement or to one time domain or to one, energy system that causes them to drop down. And that's where you see, someone like Matt Frazier or Tia Claire Toomey who they don't have those drop-offs. They don't have the big variance that, final day of competition, and they're still churning out performances that they would do day one.
Yeah.
I think, and that's, again, the essence of all CrossFit competition is consistency. It's consistency across movements. It's consistency across time and fatigue.
Yeah, and in terms of thinking about how to know if you're improving that worst possible scenario for certain movements, I have some ideas on what I look for in that, right? And it's sort of related to what we were talking about earlier, which is, can you still perform at a reasonable level in this specific thing in the worst possible scenario for doing it? So again, we can use an open workout that people have a lot of experience with. So, well, maybe not a lot of experience with, but some understanding of. Let's say that something like heavy squat cleans are not necessarily your favorite thing, and you've improved them. Your 1 rep max strength has gotten up. You've done some battery testing, so you've gotten better at doing EMOMs of heavy squat cleans, etc. And that's like, okay, well, can you do whatever that 10 down to 1 dumbbell front squat bar facing burpee is, and then actually hit a heavy squat clean after that when you're completely out of breath and your quads are exploding, right? And then another slightly different open workout, but somewhat similar in some characteristics is, okay, you've gotten better at heavy squat cleans. Can you still do them at 275 pounds, 315 pounds, 225 pounds, 145 pounds for women, etc. after doing hundreds of toes to bar and whatever, was that 19.2, 16.2, the repeat?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Whatever. We can check on the actual years and positions of that open workout, but those are essentially the worst possible scenarios in which you could be doing something like heavy squat cleans. So that's a good way to test it is, again, we talked about earlier, you want to set yourself up for success in training and have scenarios where you can push yourself and sort of exist on the edge of your capacity, but then to see, have I actually gotten better at this? It's sort of important to throw yourself into a situation which is like, damn, this is like actually a pretty stupid way to test this movement. Like, this is, I'm really not going to be able to express my maximum potential in this because I did all this other very high volume stuff beforehand, and it's all the same muscle groups, and I'm just going to be absolutely destroyed. Can I still do kind of okay?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, I think that workout in particular was probably a very good indicator of that situation. Anything where we're...
You mean the front squat one or the
front
toes bar one?
The toe to bar clean one. The other one that comes to mind is the bar muscle up one from last year. Was it last year? Where there was like 4 rounds and there was bar facing burpees and sets of 10 bar muscle ups, and people were so fatigued from the burpees that they were struggling to lock out bar muscle ups.
Yeah.
And it's,
and the other part of that one was that it had the first part of it was just power snatches and bar facing burpees.
Right.
right? And it was like a 2-part score. So people actually went pretty hard in that first piece, and they didn't have a ton of time to recover. So if you crossed whatever your metabolic threshold is in that first part, weren't able to recover fast enough, and you add in that muscle endurance component, it's like, yeah, that's a recipe for failure.
And I think people need to stay focused on combining movements that affect each other in training. Often we'll do movements that kind of complement each other in that they don't interfere too much. But I think there's a lot of benefit to doing movements that you wouldn't normally pair together because maybe they interfere with each other too much. Toes to bar and ring muscle ups is a combination that two hanging movements, you're not necessarily going to see it in a competition, but you do a high volume of toes to bar and then try and do ring muscle ups and you realize how much you use your core. There's lots of combinations like that where we don't always have them paired up because it doesn't make sense, but when you do them, it does improve your ability in competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, a tricky balance to find, because in terms of good training principles, that's not necessarily quote unquote smart training. You don't necessarily want to do that as far as best practices for being able to, do a bunch of different types of things on a daily basis and not overuse your, forearm pronators, not overuse your hip flexors. And so being able to understand, okay, how do we balance smart training principles and keep people from just sort of destroying themselves constantly with, like you said, just exposing you to a lot of different fatigue-based scenarios where you are going to have to just use the exact same muscle group over and over and over again when you're super tired to figure out how to get yourself on top of the rings when your grip is shot and your hip flexors are shot and your abs are shot and you can't breathe and you're, tasting a little bit of blood in your mouth. You got to figure it out.
I think not many people are willing to get that uncomfortable. Not many people are willing to put themselves in that position to make the progress.
You think so? I think people love doing that.
I think people don't like having their weaknesses exposed like that.
Okay, that's interesting. So people probably don't like failing on things like that, but they like feeling like they gave it their all and got their ass kicked by a workout.
Yeah.
So like
someone who's good at heavy snatches, I could give them a workout that is going to make it so they can't snatch heavy and then fail reps at something they normally hit. And that is where they don't like it. Because they feel like they've lost their ability. They feel like something they're good at is all of a sudden bad and they don't know why. They like getting uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They like getting their ass kicked, but they don't like failing at stuff that they normally wouldn't.
Yeah, because the feeling of like I accomplished something super difficult and it laid me on the floor, like that feels good to the type of person who's attracted to competing in CrossFit. Yeah. But I failed at something that I'm usually good at, feels like I'm regressing, I'm falling apart, everyone is passing me. Why am I not getting better? Do I need to change my macros? Whatever thoughts people have, I don't know. I
mean, CBD oil is probably the answer there, but yeah.
Oh yeah, fuck. We didn't mention CBD oil this entire time.
We could have saved a lot of trouble because, you don't even need to train, really. CBD oil, get some sleep, turn up to competition.
Yeah. I think that, we talk about trying to find the balance between proper training principles from like a generalized strength and conditioning perspective combined with actual sport specific prep. And it's like, really, if you just use some CBD oil, it just handles it.
I still remember the day that I saw the CBD infused rock tape. In the most CrossFit move ever.
Dude, the peak CrossFit. CrossFit has peaked.
Yeah.
Well, John, let's give. We've tried to give some tangible recommendations throughout, but if we were to sort of summarize some very tangible takeaways for people in terms of thinking about variance in their performance and how to think about improving that, what should they take away?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is identifying first what those things are. What are the movements? What are the structures? What are the time domains that give you the biggest variance? And then from there, it's working to improve. Maybe it's the consistency in training. Maybe it's percentage work if it's lifting, getting more comfortable at hitting reps at 80, 85, 90% multiple times. Maybe it's doing gymnastics work under fatigue, making things less than ideal, and trying to build a level of consistency there.
Yeah, and I think the other big takeaway, and this one isn't maybe quite as tangible, but I know a lot of folks are always concerned with like, am I getting faster? Are my maxes getting better, et cetera? And well, that's always nice to see. A thing that's actually probably more important for performance is the worst case possible scenario getting less bad? And that's difficult to track, but that's something that I really look for in athletes who I'm coaching, and that if athletes are able to recognize when the floor is moving up, that might make them feel better about their progression, even if, they're not able to put more pounds on the bar for their max snatch.
Yeah. I think one thing everyone can do is go to the last open you did, look at what your worst finish was, figure out why that was your worst finish. Likely most of your scores are in a similar range position-wise, but there's probably one that's good and one that's bad that falls outside that range.
Yeah, that's a great idea, right? And I think that's something that as coaches we tend to do, is sort of look at, okay, where have you really struggled relative to the field, and try to bring up whatever that weak point is. And yeah, you can go too far with that and just sort of like hammer people with their weaknesses all the time. But again, that's just how the sport is scored. So it's key to know, where the floor of your performance falls below what's sort of like acceptable for the level that you wish to compete at. Thanks for listening. While you're here, go ahead and head over to your podcast player, subscribe to the show, give it a rating, give it a review, all that good stuff. You can also go ahead and click through to the show notes where you can find out more about us at legionsc.com, and also follow us on Instagram at legion.sc.